Hi everyone, I'm Priya, CFRE's Media Director, and today I was speaking to Nick from The Wilderness. Welcome, Nick.
Howdy. Thanks for having me here.
So let's jump right in. Let's talk about your second album, Strangers I Used to Love. How
hmm
did it feel when it was finally released?
oh boy. Simultaneously, like we had a weight lifted off of our shoulders, and also like we were about to take on the biggest project of our lives. We wrote Strangers I Used to Love over the course of like maybe 4 years, really. Like we started kind of late 2020, and obviously the world was a very different place in 2020 and 2021. And it didn't really come together for a while because we were all quite isolated in our own little corners. But we put in so much work on that record. We rehearsed the ever loving hell out of it. We wrote together when we were able to. Like we had a little house that we rented on Howe Island, which is just north of Kingston, and we made supper together, and then we'd rehearse all night. We'd wake up in the morning, we'd keep rehearsing. And so for like a good 4 years, that kind of feeling of like being very isolated and not knowing what was going to come next was something that we were just steeped in. And so when we released it, it was almost like it wasn't like real. You know what I mean? It was like disbelief. It was like you're tossing and turning before the night before a big trip or your first day of school or something. It really felt like surreal for us to release that record. And then we got to tour it like immediately after it came out. We got to drive all the way across Canada and the US. So we really jumped out of the frying pan and into the fire, you know?
I can imagine it just like felt great just to like finally have it like done. Like all those years of you like working on it, you can finally see the end product.
Yeah, well, and it's still like an ongoing thing, right? A really good quote that I heard when I was at Canadian Music Week with the band earlier this year. It was, I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was like Pharrell Williams, and someone was asking about like, oh, why do you keep promoting this old song of yours? And the response was because people haven't heard it yet. And now it's like, we released this record back in April, and we're all still so proud of it, and we're still trying to tell people about the tunes, and we're going out there and we're playing our faces off, and like we're just still fired up about it. You know what I mean? So it doesn't feel like the project is done, I guess. We never really got that moment of like, oh, you've turned in your homework, you know? We didn't really give ourselves a chance to rest. We released it. We played a release show that night. People somehow knew the words to the record already. And then we just started driving to Winnipeg. Like we haven't given ourselves a break. It hasn't stopped, you know?
That's great. I mean, I guess it's like what you're in the business for. You just keep going and going, right?
Yeah, well, I think that's what music is about. It's like, at least for me, and I think for my bandmates too, it's very much a way to understand the world that we live in, which is always changing, sometimes for the better, sometimes dramatically for the worse. And so I don't think there will ever be a point where we're not moving. You know what I mean? As songwriters, as musicians, and also like as a band, that's kind of the ethos of the band is that we're in it for the long haul, whatever the heck that looks like. We've been a band for 10 years almost already. And in many ways, it feels like we've accomplished a lot. And like I said, in many ways, it feels like we're just getting started. So we're going to keep at it as long
You
as we
can
can.
definitely
I
see the dedication. Like when I listen, like I can feel it, hear it. It's definitely out there.
appreciate that a lot.
So what's your favorite song on the album and why?
Oh, okay. That's actually a really hard question. And I might be the wrong person to ask, but I think my favorite song is probably the second track on the record, Hollywood Boulevard, because it's like almost an outlier on the record. It's like so big and over the top and like musical theater sounding, in contrast with the rest of the record, which is really quite introspective. And we sort of
Mhm.
did that on purpose because that tune is sort of like a parody of what we thought being in a rock band would look like. You know, that tune by Nickelback, Rockstar, that's like, talking about, oh, we're gonna live in a big mansion and we're gonna do drugs and all this stuff. We were like, what if we just dial that up to 11 and turn up the cheese musically? And I live for that kind of stuff, but then again, I'm like one of the nerdier guys in the band. I wrote all those saxophone harmonies. Jonas, our singer, was like, "Oh man, I really want like background vocals that sound like the muses in Hercules." And I was like, "I got you, brother. I have a whole ass music degree. I can write that stuff." So that tune, just because it's so big and so ludicrous and so grandiose and so like funny, I guess, is probably my favorite tune on the record, but I think that answer will change depending on who you ask. I know that Jonas is really, really into one that we wrote called Words Get in the Way, which is a tune about compassion fatigue that's also like really big and anthemic. Max, our guitar player, is a really big fan of a tune on that record called Somewhere Left Behind because it's very melodic, and it deals with a lot of like existential dread, I guess. There's a couple tunes on there that I wrote that I'm very proud of. The End of Highway 1 is one of them. That song took a lot of effort and a lot of reflection to write. But I don't know. I don't think there's a bad song on the album. I don't
I
actually.
think
That
they're
was kind
all
of our
great.
goal. That was kind of our goal. It's like just 10 good songs, short and sweet, no skips, and I think we did okay at that. But yeah, my fave just for the cheese factor is probably Hollywood Boulevard.
For sure. Like when I was listening to the album, I had to like space it out because I was just like, I don't know, I was just immersed like one song at a time. Like there were so many things I was like thinking about, and I was like, hey, I really just want to soak it in and understand like this one song. Then I would move on when I was like emotionally prepared and like ready.
It felt like that for us when we were writing it too. Jeez Louise. Glad it's not just us.
One of my personal favorites is the title track, Strangers I Used to Love. I just
Yeah.
felt like I just graduated school like back in April, and it was just like very like nostalgic for me about like one phase of life to another. So I was wondering what's like the real story behind the song?
Well, okay, so we're really collaborative when we write, but Jonas was sort of like the progenitor of that tune, our singer. And so the story behind that tune, really, and he'll tell it better than me, but the abridged version is that he went back home to England. He's from Canterbury in the UK. I think 2022 for like the first time since COVID. So it had been a few years since he had seen like his family and his friends and all of this. And he went for his sister's wedding. And over there like realized like just how long he's been in Canada. He's been here for like 11 years. And really all of us like have moved to Kingston from somewhere or another. I moved from Guelph. That's not as far as England. But he's like, oh yeah, I'm realizing like this place is different and it keeps growing and moving on even though I'm not there. And like the actual tagline of the tune Strangers I Used to Love came from like something that his partner said where like, man, if I have to keep like making small talk with strangers about Canadian winters for like one more minute, I'm gonna lose it. And he came back and we wrote that tune, and like he's sort of the author, I suppose. He's like the narrator in that situation. I suppose in other tunes like each of us are kind of narrating certain things, but that's very much the idea of the tune, is like realizing that home is something you build, but
Mhm.
sometimes like the actual place will keep moving, whether or not you're there. And really, the reason we put that tune at the front of the record, this is sort of an aside, but it is relevant to the theme of the tune, is because every other song on the record had like a little bit of that flavor to it. That song was sort of like the overture, the thesis statement to the rest of them, which
Mhm.
all had something to do with like writing a love letter to a past self or a past home or like a past friend or a past lover or something like that, or a past dream. So yeah, I guess the actual story is just that it was a trip back home to England. But what it became was like really, really anthemic of the whole theme of the record for all of us, quite
Yeah,
frankly.
I love the details and like just the lyrics and just like again, like I didn't really know what the story was about, but I just felt
Mm-hmm.
like it built a story or a narrative in my head. Like I was there and I was like experiencing this whole like I don't know, I guess like this nostalgia I was feeling.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's actually really reassuring because we agonized over every aspect of this record. Um, Fun fact, for example, like the record cover,
Mhm.
with that photo of the dogs and the clothesline and what have you. That is a photo that Jonas took on a film camera like that day that his sister got married, that he's describing in the
Mhm.
tune. And I didn't even know this. I'm the one who designed the cover. He just told me to use that photo. I didn't even know why until afterwards. And I was like, oh, this is great. This is a great piece of the lore. But yeah, it very much was an intentional choice to include all of these little details because that's how the nostalgia feels. It's different for everybody. Everybody's
Mhm.
got their own flavor of it, but I suppose some of the themes are more universal. So like in Jonas describing his relationship with like growing up back home, in tunes like Strangers I Used to Love or Garden of England or The Underpass, or in like me writing about like seeing the mountains for the first time in the end of Highway 1. Like that nostalgia feels different to each of us, but we're trying to grasp at like what the shared experience is, I guess. And so to hear that you resonated with that is actually very validating, and I'm really glad to hear
You're
it.
doing a good job.
Thank you very much.
The whole album, I just felt like, for lack of a better word, it just felt so homey to me. Like, just like wrapped up in kind of like a warm like hug. And like, again, even though I didn't know exactly like what you guys were writing about specifically, it just brought me back to things like I was going through. And I just like, that's how I know like this is good music, you know, feeling connected with like the artist, the lyrics, the music, just like you just feel kind of like one.
Thank you. I appreciate that a lot.
No problem. I also wanted to talk about Somewhere Left Behind because the lyric video just came out earlier this week. What can you tell me about it?
So okay, that tune is a funny one for us. Jonas loves to describe this tune as having been written from like the pre-chorus outwards, which is kind of like making a sandwich and starting with just mustard. Um, and it was a new experience for us when we wrote it, because what the writing process looks like for the band most of the time is that like one of us will like sit down and like have like a little note and like a couple of chords, and we'll bring it to the band, and then the band will rehearse it and we'll turn it into a wilderness song, right? Kind of in the same way of like taking this personal experience of whatever and turning it into something that like is relatable. Whereas that tune we pretty well all wrote in the same room. Like we were throwing lyrics back and forth towards each other, sitting like in one room together. We were trading melody ideas, and so it felt like a song that we all really put a lot into. And I mean, the tune itself is kind of like I said about like the existential dread of like trying to follow your dreams, I guess. We're a band who's very vocal about the fact that we do this thing because we love it. It's not because we get
Mhm.
paid particularly well. It's not because we like want to be rock stars like Gene Simmons or whatever. It's just because we like making music that helps us connect with our friends and with whomever and with each other. And
Mhm.
Somewhere Left Behind very much wrestles with this like this worry of like, okay, all of us are like get it going on 30. Some of us are like roughly there. It's like, are we just delinquents for being in a rock band still instead of working day jobs? Like, is this ever going to get better? You know, like, are we ever going to like air quotes make it, whatever that means? And I suppose it like is sort of a way to like to deal with that feeling by like accepting it, I
Mhm.
guess.
It's a
And
healthy
like
way.
yeah, and then like well, and singing about it, but like acknowledging that like the past is the past and the future is the future, and that you're here now. I don't know. I try and take it as like an optimistic kind of tune, but it very much sits somewhere in the middle there of like of that dialogue in the present of like, oh my God, what am I doing? you know. Um, so it's an emotional tune. A lot of our tunes are emotional tunes, but that one is extra emotional.
I feel like they're timeless, I guess, because these feelings can just like happen throughout your life, you know? Like there's not
Yeah.
like one point where I think it will fade. Like someone will always be able to like come back to this and like reconnect with it.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was trying to describe these tunes in like a sentence a piece when we were writing them as like a creative exercise. And that one I wrote teenage coming of age story, except 10 years later. And
I
so
like
like
that.
I agree with you is what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Like it I don't know if we'll ever stop relating to it. This, like, I keep seeing TikToks from some 41
Yeah.
where and their shtick is so funny because they're like, they're all older, they got like gray hair, bunch of tattoos, and like it's a bunch of TikToks of like young folks being like, "Oh, you were my mom's favorite band growing up," and they're all just like, "Oh Jesus!" Like, but then they went on to comments. I saw again like an Instagram post or something about like almost relating more to songs like I'm Just a Kid now than they did when they wrote it. And like I feel that. I empathize with that. I think that our music kind of aligns with that. you know?
Yeah, I saw parody. like I guess an upcoming artist or just someone on TikTok wrote called like I'm just an adult.
Yeah,
And it was like all about like I think like inflation and just like all the crazy stuff like happening.
boy howdy.
And I just thought like it's so like interesting how that song I'm Just a Kid came out so long ago and now like it's still inspiring people to like create or like it's still relatable. Same with like Green Day, like the
Oh
new
God, yeah.
generation just discovered them, so they're like all over TikTok and Instagram. They're re-promoting their videos and like they're dropping new merch and it's just crazy.
Which is wild to me, right? Like the first CD I ever bought in like fourth grade with my allowance money was American Idiot. And I work as a teacher now, and there are kids who are like, "Oh, I really like this band. Do you know of them?" I'm like, "Don't say that to me. Don't do that." Um, but on the other hand, like it also speaks to this idea that like you as a person contain multitudes, right? Like there's
Mhm.
this again, I'm bad at citing my sources because my sources are like Tumblr posts. But like there's that quote of like, okay, nobody tells you that like when you turn 25 or whatever, you're still also 23 and still also 19 and still also 13 and all this. And like
Mhm.
in that same way, like it's very, very, I guess, reaffirming to know that like music does have that timeless quality to it in a lot of ways. And it's reaffirming to see that like, you know, for all the existential dread that we have about being in a band, this record coming out, you know, earlier on in this year, and all the amount of time that I spend sitting around in my living room wondering if I should be making TikToks about songs that I put out 6 months ago. Like, why are we not talking about the tunes? They're good tunes. People
Mhm.
haven't heard them yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I keep coming back to that. And like in every facet, like, good. Let the youngsters have Green Day. Youngsters, as if I'm not still young. Let them have it. It's great. Let's listen to more Green Day.
I remember just like when I was in like grade school, I was listening to Green Day and like everyone thought like, oh, that was the emo band, you
Yeah, I
know? And now it's
know.
like everyone loves Green Day and like people are analyzing lyrics. And I saw this thing about Good Riddance and how like,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
they always use it at like graduation and people always think it's like a really happy song.
Yeah,
I always
it's
thought it's a very just like kind of like screw you, kind of like,
yeah.
yeah. So like it's just weird like the takes that has taken.
Media literacy is important, kids. Listen to Green Day.
Yes. We need to educate them.
That's what I'm saying.
So I just want to go back to something you mentioned earlier.
Totally.
How does the band measure success?
Oh, okay. Hey, these are hard questions, but I like it. I like it. I'm
Okay,
here
I'm
for
making
hard
you work.
questions. Yeah. This is a quote where I can cite my sources
Okay.
actually. And the quote I'm going to share is from Rob Baker from the Tragically Hip. We recorded our first record Until Tomorrow with him at the helm producing, and we recorded it at the Hip Studio, the Bathhouse, which is
Mhm.
just close to Kingston. And I remember talking to Rob with a class I was teaching at the time, and one of the other teachers being like, "When did you know you made it?" And his answer floored me. And what he said was like, "Man, I thought we made it like 100 times. The first time we like successfully played a song in the garage, I thought we made it. And then the first time that we played downtown at a local pub, I thought we made it. And then we had 50 people and I thought we made it. And then we released a record and I thought we made it. And then like suddenly we're in like Amsterdam or whatever, playing to 100,000 people at a festival. And it's like, I wasn't surprised because I'd already thought I made it 100 times, you know?
I love that.
Um, and for us, I think what that means is that like we have to keep looking for it. We have to keep finding it because otherwise you can get very demoralized. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I think there's emotional moments in every show that make me feel like we made it. And that's not purely based on like the size of the crowd or anything. Sometimes someone will come up to you at the merch table and say like, "Hey, I heard this song that you wrote and I talked to my dad for the first time in 10 years because I
Wow.
heard this song." That's a real thing that happened.
I
You
wasn't
know,
doubting
I
you.
I had somebody message me personally about one of the songs on Strangers I Used to Love, the last track, the Arboretum. And they told me that their partner had passed away very suddenly, and that because of this tune that they wanted to be like composted and planted into a tree. And I'm like, why am I bestowed such responsibility? Being alive, this is insane to me. But it's like, yeah, when have you made it? You know, like I always tell people our goal as a band is not to be famous. It's actually just to pay our friggin' rent. Honestly, we just want rock and roll to be our day jobs. So if there's any like short answer to the question, it's that. But the long answer is that like you got to look for moments to feel like you made it every single day, and you got to let that make you inspired to keep making music because that's what it's about is those moments of human connection. If that's with 10,000 people at the Budweiser stage, great. If it's with two people at the Toucan on a Tuesday night, like fine. You know what I mean? I I worry that in many ways we'll never feel like we've made it. And then I have to reassure myself that like no, doing this is worth it. It always has been worth it. And if you stop doing it tomorrow, you will still have done well.
That's a good mindset. Even like with myself, I mean, I definitely don't think I've made it in my career. Like I'm just like starting out to be clear. But I think like just appreciating like the opportunities that like come up. Also like I guess like as a way to like humble myself, I say like if you think you made it like really early, I feel like sometimes like you don't try as hard, you know? Like you
Well,
get like
right.
less motivated, so you always like want to keep working to like have like a bigger impact or just like I don't know, I'm a very goal-oriented person, so I think it's important to just always like focus on like moving forward. What can I do more? Because I have that passion to continue.
Well, totally. And like that's a double-edged sword too, right? I don't ever want to get too comfortable
Yeah.
being a rock musician. Like I would love, 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 love to not have to sleep on the floor every night of a tour. But I don't ever want to do a tour where I don't sleep on the floor at least once. You know?
Do you want to be able to go into a restaurant and just like name drop and then they're just like, oh my God, and they like clear
No, no, I don't. I want to be a regular dude. I just want to be a regular dude who spends most of his time doing things that are joyous and like make sense of the commitment that we have
Mhm.
to living in this like skeleton that moves, you know. That's it. And yeah, like you said, being goal oriented is like is the way to do that. And it also like begs you to be realistic with yourself.
Yeah.
It begs you to be very, very candid. If I wake up tomorrow and one of our songs has gone so ultra viral that like we're playing the Scotiabank Arena next year, great. I'll feel really friggin' stoked about that. But if that doesn't happen, then like I'm just gonna go practice my saxophone for an hour and that will be enough for today, you know?
I just feel like you have so much like positivity. I love it.
There is no choice. We are bound to be alive. So we have to make the most of it, I guess. There is no choice otherwise.
Let's talk about your show happening November 21st in Toronto. What are
Yeah.
you most excited about?
I love Toronto. I do. I'm sure everybody says this on your show, but being in Toronto is like it's so vivid and colorful and busy and loud. And I love that about being in Toronto because it's like we don't know who actually is going to be coming to the show. You know, we have no clue. When we play at home, we know we're going to see our buddies. When we play in Toronto, it's like, okay, we got to work. We we got to make sure we are well rehearsed because there are bands that can do this better than us. We got to make sure that we have got our A game on, that we are putting on a good show every time. We got to win over people who are walking by on Queen West or whatever and hearing sounds emanating out of the venue. Um, El Macambo like is a legendary venue. It's got a lot of history in it. I played there 10 years ago in a metal band when the place was like in a dire, dire state. And my dad, who's a huge rock and roll person, was like, "Oh man, did you know like the Rolling Stones played there?" And I was like, "Are you sure?" Yeah. But like since then they've put in so much effort to the space. It's a beautiful space. It sounds so nice in there. It's like just such a pleasure to play. And I don't know, what am I most excited for about the show? Like, I just want to go somewhere where we got to play our faces off. Those are my favorite kinds of gigs. You know, I'm going to do all the little rituals that I have every time we go to Toronto. I'm going to walk a couple blocks down from the venue and get banh mi probably. And then I'm going to get two of them. So I have one for after the show. We're going to sing some tunes out back in the parking lot and then we're going to play. And hopefully people come. Good Lord. It would be nice at some point in my life to not be stressed about that. But relating back to our earlier conversation, we look on the bright side. I'm just excited to play. I'm excited to put on the best show we can possibly put on, which is always just the next show we do. So
Again, a great answer. So the band has been compared to numerous artists like Bruce Springsteen, The National, and the Lumineers. What do these comparisons mean to you?
I think they have a lot of weight and a lot of responsibility imbued in them. I actually love the comparison to Bruce Springsteen in particular because it does a very apt job of describing us musically,
Hmm.
right? Like there's a lot of sound in the band. There's saxophone, woo. There's keyboards, there's lots of guitars and tambourines and vocal harmonies and stuff. But there's also like a lot of storytelling, you know what I mean? And there's a lot of relatability in the lyrics, and there's a lot of like singing in protest of like the hardships of everyday life. And
Hmm.
those like groups like the Lumineers, again, same, like they've got songs that will make you cry while you are singing your face off at karaoke on a Friday night, and that's what I live for. I can't sing Cleopatra without crying, which is terrible because we used to sing it all the time. But when people say that about our music, I feel like simultaneously really honored and simultaneously like very humbled because it means that like we've done like just an okay enough job of singing about our emotions that other people are like, hey, no, yeah, actually that makes sense. I feel very validated by those things, and it's not because of the grandiosity of any of these groups. It's not because Bruce Springsteen is like selling out arenas or anything. It's literally just because that means that our tunes did what they were supposed to do, which is be singable enough that people can figure them out at a concert and be emotional enough that you have to talk about them to your therapist. So that's my job, and that means we're doing it.
Again, great answer. I feel like the Lumineers for me, they always represented like very reflective, like
Yeah.
they get you like really like in your feels, and I definitely do see that with you guys. So I saw like those connections. I wanted to jump back. I know we did talk a little bit about this before, but
Mm-hmm.
how do you feel the band has evolved since Until Tomorrow?
Oh boy, howdy. I think we learned what like the wilderness capital W is. Until Tomorrow for me was a really, really fun album to write and record because it felt like each of us really got to bring ourselves to the wilderness. There are songs on there, and you can very easily tell like who was at the heart of each of them, and they all kind of sound like that person. And the band did a really good job of like, okay, figuring out how like we're gonna write this tune that like nerdy old me wrote, whereas on Strangers I Used to Love, we spent so much more time being like, okay, where do each of us fit into something that is like bigger than us? You know what I mean? When I say like the capital W wilderness, it was like, what do we actually want the band to sound like, as opposed to just each of us
Mhm.
doing this one little thing that we like? We really settled into our roles instrumentally. Like for me specifically, I play a lot of saxophone, but on this record, I also played the 12 string guitar a lot. And now there's 0 seconds on stage where I'm not doing something because I'm playing guitar every
Mhm.
second. I'm not playing saxophone. Max, our lead guitar player, who joined the band after we released Until Tomorrow, like had a big musical say in the direction that we took things, and so we leaned into like a bit heavier of a sound. There's more distortion on there. We wrote lyrics together. We came in with like half finished tunes and said like, okay, I need some help distilling this feeling. Where can we as a team put all of our like mutual experiences into this so that like we can narrate it through a particular voice, but it again can be relatable by the team. So if the question is like how have we grown since Until Tomorrow, I suppose it's like it really is, I think, that we learned who we are as like the band, where the sum is great or the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, you know what I mean, as opposed to
Mhm.
just us each being in our own little corners doing our own little riffs. That's the biggest change for me, I think.
Would you say that's the biggest challenge of like working in a band with so many people, or is there another thing that kind of poses a challenge?
I would say yes, but that's like a very good like
It's a good
that's
challenge to
it,
have.
it's a good challenge to have, but it's also like a very good example of like the broader challenge. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
In particular, you're going to have musical differences with your bandmates, right? We all come from different musical backgrounds. I was raised on like death metal and I got really into jazz. And people ask me, they're like, oh, what are your influences? And I'm like, okay, I listen to music that sounds like it should be in Mario Kart. You want to hear that the band's influences are Sam Fender. Um, all of us come from different musical backgrounds. You have to find a way to like coalesce and come together with something that you all really want to do. But that's like just one flavor of like the overarching challenge, which is that being in a band with your best friends can be very emotionally challenging. You have to learn to like support each other through massive upheavals in your life that like might turn into a song or might actually just require you to be emotionally supportive. You have to know how to invest yourself in like the business part of it without losing sight of who you are as friends. You have to learn to like deal with all of the like extra connotations of yourself as a social media manager, as a
Mm.
performer, as a touring artist, as an emotional support, as a friend, as a coworker, as a like whatever, and where all of those things mesh, you have to like be really comfortable navigating that because otherwise, otherwise being in a band is more of a job than it needs to be, I guess. We're very much a band of people who want to be in a band with one another.
Yeah.
We're all best friends. And I think that shows in our music. I think that shows in our writing. And like the songwriting thing is like actually just one flavor of the bigger thing, which is how do you acknowledge your whole self in a group of other people who are also trying to do that and still come out with something that makes even a remote bit of sense, you know?
I can see like I mean just like how you guys describe yourself and like again through the music you guys are all very close so like again I feel like it's a good challenge to have because it would be so much harder I think to work together if you weren't close.
Oh my God. Yeah, there would be no way. I'd be scared out of my boots to write songs. It's a very vulnerable process, you know what I mean? Because we don't show up with charts, you know what I mean? Like if you were writing for a big band or an orchestra or whatever, like you'd show up with a score and then you would figure out how to play it. We show up with like chords and lyrics, like I said, sometimes that aren't even fully done. And you just got to be comfortable like being like, here's the song that I wrote because I was so devastatingly sad, and I'm not going to be able to play it without crying. And I need you to help me turn it into a thing that we're going to go perform in front of hundreds of people. It's a very vulnerable thing.
Mhm.
If we didn't have that like secure emotional connection to one another, I would not write songs because I would be scared out of my wits to talk about them.
So just as before we wrap up I got the little notification we have 5 minutes left.
Yeah, yeah.
I just wanted to ask, as 2023 comes to an end, what goals do you have as a band for the new year, and how do you plan to accomplish them?
So 2024 has been a big year for us because we released Strangers I Used to Love, but 2025 is the 10th anniversary of The Wilderness being a band, which is hilarious. And we're hoping to tour quite a lot, honestly. We're hoping to like reimagine some of our older music and rearrange it. We're hoping to write some new music. We're kind of in the beginning stages of working on some new songs as we speak. I don't have any to give you yet because, like I said, they're still in the like napkin sketch, hey, please be nice to my emotional thing stage of songwriting. But we're hoping to just be super duper busy and play as much as possible. We have a few tunes that we're sitting on from our back catalog that I'm hoping we can release quite soon. Again, I can't tell you exactly what yet because they're a bit of a secret right now.
Maybe
But
in another interview.
suffice to say, if you're listening to this in 2025, just double check in with us. And if you don't see us being loud and touring a whole bunch, you can slap my wrist and tell me that I'm a fool. But if we play our cards right, we're just going to be loud. We're going to be performing as much as we can. We're going to be writing as much as we can. We're going to be releasing as much music as we can because
That's how you make an
I,
impact, right?
yeah, because we don't ever want to stop doing it. That's it. You got to give yourself one more thing and one more thing and one more thing. And that's all, that's the best we can do. So,
So, thank you for coming on the show. It was great speaking to you. Before we disconnect, did you have anything you wanted to share with our listeners?
Yeah, well, come to our show at El Macambo on Thursday, November 21st in
Good plug.
downtown Toronto. We're playing with a band called Pater, who we have not yet met, but who write an equal amount about wonky relationships with dads to us. So we're going to play an evening of dad rock, and you should come to the show because it'll be really friggin' good. And support your local radio station. Thank you to CFRE for existing and also for having us loud, passionate rock musicians on the show. Thank you, Priya, for having me
No
today.
problem. It was great speaking to you. Thank you so much again. I'm Priya on CFRE Radio, and we'll see you next time.
Drove across the country, there's some places I want you to see. The house in the hills where I spend my summer.